All right, Final Word Cricket Podcast. Adam Collins in a familiar room. I'm in the Chief Executive's office.
2 years ago, wasn't it? You last here?
With Richard Gould. Thank you, first and foremost, for giving us some of your time today. I feel like we've done quite a few of these across the journey when you were at Surrey with your annual sit-down.
I look forward to my annual inspections or biannual inspections from Mr. Collins.
And then it was 2 years ago we sat here, different sides of the desk, but it wasn't long after you'd taken the role, if I recall correctly, and you were able to sort of frame your perspectives on what you thought the job was, I guess, going to constitute, right? At the time you had so much experience in cricket, Somerset, Surrey and so on, but different type of role. And that's the context to that chat, and we were able to fit you into all of that and tell your backstory. My impression of that interview was that it was well received because you didn't do the political thing. You gave proper answers, you answered the questions. And
that's all changed now. I've been in the governing body for 2 years, so it's only political answers, I'm afraid.
Well, we'll see. We've got 45 minutes and I've got about 75 topics. Well, you know what it's like with these things, especially at the moment. What's that adage about? There are decades where nothing happens and there are years where decades happen. It sort of feels like we're in the latter at the moment.
I agree.
Right, where a lot of our chat will probably focus around those big calls you're making, both at home and away, and how it'll have an effect for probably decades across, I suppose, the World Test Championship, Future Tours program, the 100 here, the County Review. So my first question, enormous stakes. Do you feel that at the moment, that the calls you're making right now will probably define your whole time as a cricket administrator?
Yes, but they're not calls I'm making. You know, you're a CEO, you're an office holder, but you're responsible for the whole game. And I think cricket does a good job of making collaborative, collective decisions if given the opportunity. And I think that's what's happening now. We're all, we've reached at a few junctions where we know some decisions need to be taken. We know progress needs to be made in particular areas. And as a game, we're pushing forward.
I'll start with what feels like a bit of a half volley, but I sometimes feel like administrators don't get the chance to talk about your success in these chats because there'll be all sorts of questions later which will be uncomfortable. But like you had the start of the women's Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 tournament last week, and what that means as far as something that was in your intro when you rocked up, you've ridden the bumps, and now you're out the other side and you've got something to show for it. That must be quite rewarding.
Yeah, I think the investment into women's cricket is timely. It should have happened years and years ago. We're trying to catch up for lost time. The fact that every county club now has a women's team, I think we'll look back in 12 months' time and go, how has that not happened before? I think it's an absolute no-brainer. It's sometimes quite difficult to deliver. Beth Barrett-Wild and her team have done a great job. We haven't been able to keep everybody happy because we've got a certain number of teams in Tier 1, which is the fully professional, and then we've got Tiers 2 and 3. But we've had to be pragmatic in some areas, understand the strength of the talent pool, the finances available, and really go for it. But we're very excited about this with county women's games having happened this weekend, and Tier 1 fully professional kicking off next weekend, and we've got 150, 200 professional women's contracts out there, which is back in 2019. I think we had 18.
It would have been inconceivable to have been having a conversation starting off with women's domestic cricket like this even a few years ago. So, I mean, we're sat here on Wisden Release Day, which is good timing, I think, in some respects, because this is the one day of the year or one of the couple of days of the year when the rest of the world is paying attention to the topics that only usually a handful of people are digging into, not least this podcast. So, in the editor's notes, Lawrence Booth, his first passage is about Jay Shah's ascension to the top job at the ICC. It reminded me of that. There was an advertising campaign when I was a kid in Australia set to the song of Leonard Cohen, Everybody Knows, and it was about smoking and about everyone kind of knows. Some people turn a blind eye to it, but everyone kind of knows the damage that smoking does. And I thought of that when reading Lawrence's piece, that you talk to people privately about almost the inevitability of it all and the shrugging of shoulders, as Lawrence describes it, of there with the lack of accountability. I mean, I wonder how you interpret that tension and that criticism as someone who is there at ICC Towers from time to time in your role as the ECB's chief executive, but that idea that at ICC land there is a challenge about the public perception of whether it's fit for purpose at the moment.
In terms of lack of accountability, the ICC is a members' organisation. And so any chair or chief exec of that organisation is wholly and directly responsible to their members. Jay Shah, having now taken over as chair, has done so with the absolute support of the majority of the members. That's what the members have voted for. That's what they wanted. And I think sometimes the BCCI gets an unfair rap from the media, because we need to understand sometimes the finances of cricket. And the domestic market in India dwarfs every other country in the world. They're delivering probably 90% of the value. And therefore, BCCI in India should have a significant say in what happens. And I'll go further than that. If you look outside of the other members of the ICC, if you take out the ICC revenues that are generated largely by India, not more than 4 or 5 or perhaps 6 boards are actually financially sustainable based on their own domestic cricket markets. We all rely hugely on the Indian market.
But is it a healthy relationship when there would be so many members of the ICC, as you say, a members' body, a federation of sorts, when they have to, well, the way you're describing it, in the absence of Indian money, they wouldn't be financially stable? That, to me, sounds like an imbalance in the power dynamic, and it would be difficult for...
There's a huge imbalance in the power dynamic because of the size of those markets. But I would also argue that the BCCI take their responsibilities on global cricket really seriously. You look at the number of international fixtures that the Indian team plays away from India. They play probably more than us, and therefore that would make them, that playing more cricket than anybody anywhere else. Every time they go and play in New Zealand or Ireland or the West Indies, they're effectively doing so for free because the way that the cricket market works is that the broadcast revenue, both home and away, home and abroad, is owned by whichever team is hosting at home. So, I think the BCCI work very hard to try and make sure that there is a competitive global market.
The perception, though, right? It's not just doing the right thing, the perception of being seen to be doing the right thing. That's important in public life. And you know that as well as anyone. Roles with scrutiny, you need to be seen to be doing the right thing. And the Champions Trophy being an example of where it did look at times rather comical. And the lines in sand that are drawn, I mean, the perception from the outside isn't too crash hot, and that's not just a media thing either. People can make their own minds up on those matters.
We were very closely involved in the discussions between Pakistan and India as to whether or not they were going to travel or not. Yep. So there are significant issues there. Also, to ensure that the broadcaster gets the number of viewers it needs, sometimes requires particular measures to be put in place. But let's not also just assume that cricket is run by and for, say, India, Australia and England. If you look at the fact that we're now playing a global tournament every year, that wasn't something that India, Australia and England necessarily supported. That was done because the other members wanted that, because the other members realised that by playing more ICC cricket, there would be a bigger ICC pie to split between them. And so it is democratic. It is based on who votes for what, and I know I do see a lot of opinions placed around the ICC tables.
So, diplomacy being important, and I suppose the Afghanistan women's situation, there's a version of that, right, where from time to time ECB, CA were criticised for not saying enough, and then in recent months, indeed in recent weeks, the new funding announcement for Afghanistan's women. I know that you played quite a big role publicly in that a couple of months ago, being far more strident than ECB had been in the past on that, and it results in something quite significant. I wonder whether it provided pause for thought about when there are moments where you feel like using your megaphone might be more important than using your back channels. We're getting out there on the front foot and expressing a view that's counter to India's view, perhaps, and I'm sure there are times when you are in line with it, right? Where we're getting out there and saying it might help take the public on a bit of a journey as well?
Oh, definitely. I think the megaphone is helpful at times, and I think did have an impact in terms of the decision that was made by the ICC last week. But there are very many differing opinions put around the ICC table, and not all of them will have been supportive of the action that was taken. But you look at the ICC board table and around the chief execs, the committee that I sit, and one of the notable observations is it is all men. Yeah. We don't have that parity or clarity of voice that we need around the ICC table. And it's an area where we've been able to make huge strides in the ECB, both around the ECB board table and around all the county tables, because we've been able to mandate it. But when we are dealing with international environments, we need to sometimes accept that, or understand at least, not necessarily accept, that what is a norm for us culturally will not be a norm or seen as accepted elsewhere.
So in summary, it would be, I read a piece in the Telegraph this morning which was like, taking from the editor's notes that I referred to before, that maybe it's time for Australia and England to publicly stand up to India more often, whereas you feel like maybe it's the behind closed doors is the better way of approaching these things when there are differences of opinion?
I think we'll take whichever approach we think is appropriate to get the best outcome, and we'll be flexible in that.
Saudi Arabia is another strong storyline that's been running throughout the last 12 months or so, whether it's a Super League or a Grand Slam or a second IPL. I mean, really, it doesn't really matter. Take your pick, right? It tends to prompt quite strong opinions on the concept writ large. Some people play on, who cares? It makes everyone rich. Why does it matter? Others, polar opposite. The game should resist dealing with a regime that has an appalling human rights record. I just wonder how it makes you feel in your guts when you think about the idea of Saudi Arabian money or the Saudi Arabian regime having a significant stake in the future of global cricket in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I haven't seen or been involved in any conversations with Saudi Arabia at this point coming into cricket in any way. I think those conversations have largely come out of Australia over the last few months, and they're not something that we've been directly involved in. You can see how Saudi Arabia have got involved with a whole variety of different sports globally, whether it's golf or football or Olympics and World Cups. And I think it's pragmatic, and there is some sense in understanding that they may want to have a role in cricket in the way that they do in other sports. But I haven't been involved in any of those discussions. Certainly the conversations that I've seen in terms of some kind of sort of Super League going around the world, I don't recognise the need for that, and I don't recognise that as something that would get any traction. But well, let's see. There's always other opportunities in sport, but not within the. The stories that I've been seeing and hearing come out of Australia are not something that we've been involved in.
But your sport. You're a militaryman originally as well, of course. I mean, you've got a strong moral compass, I know that, of you. Is it the sort of thing that makes you, that jars for you? Just as a concept, not talking specifics necessarily, but the idea of the game being awash with money, and we all know, again, is that everybody knows the genesis of why this is even a talking point to begin with. Is it the sort of thing, as a senior administrator, where you go, just hold on a minute, guys, just hold your horses? Or are you more of the view that, well, it's a free market and people can do as they please?
It's a free market, and and then people will take their decisions and make their decisions thereafter, and that may be the consumer, that may be the players, it may be the teams involved, it may be the governing bodies, but taking a particular stance, you've got to be very secure in your own belief structures, and the UK historically has not had a great record, and therefore I think when we're dealing with on such a multinational scale, I don't think it's necessarily sensible to try and maintain the moral high ground because many cultures are very different in the way that they go about things.
Yeah,
I'll give you an example. Okay, I went to the Qatar World Cup, Football World Cup. 2 weeks before that, everybody was going, "Oh, it's a disgrace. They banned alcohol." I went to 5 games. They were great because everybody was behaving in a really proper fashion. And and sometimes these other countries will look at us and go, why does UK sport always have to be linked with having 3 or 4 pints? So I think that you have to. Everyone's different, and they're different for reasons. And I think the important thing is to understand their reasons and where they want to go.
I definitely recognise the comparison to the 2022 Football World Cup. Yeah. But I mean, we're talking about a kingdom that doesn't recognise religious freedom or sexual orientations, the mass beheadings in squares. I mean, this is stuff that's is fairly rogue by any standard. Now, I suppose in real terms, I know you're reluctant to get into this theoretically, but
I'm not reluctant to get involved in it theoretically. But we just haven't had any conversations whatsoever. So,
yearly though, I wonder whether the 100 sale was there ever. I'm just curious whether at any stage through that process.
We haven't had any direct approaches like that. So you're probably better off speaking to those members that have, because we're not one of them.
Would you? They might though. In free market, it's a floating asset, I guess, going forward. And if take your pick. I'm not going to name one team. I don't want to get in trouble with that. But in the future, if there was a sale in the offing to the Saudi Arabia,
and we have to work with that. Saudi Arabia already own football teams.
They certainly do. Certainly do. So that it wouldn't be okay. So at this stage of the game, it wouldn't be the sort of thing where you would step in from ECB and say, no, we're not having 100 franchise that's so big about inclusivity and women and girls.
Not because we have to abide by the law of the land as well.
Yeah.
If there are trading partners who are legally able to be involved in businesses in the UK, we've got to make sure that we're not excluding people as well illegally.
So Cricket Australia, as you say, it feels like the approach they're taking to this is very much, again, to use an old political adage, they rather have Saudi Arabia inside the tent pissing out, not outside the tent pissing in. And Todd Greenberg being the new boss of CA, and he did a big feature interview the other day, which was most instructive. And feels like a little bit like you. He's a guy who's coming into the job having had other jobs in cricket, and like you as well, he's a cricket nut, right? So I suppose that's a good starting point for your relationship, that you've both got very much the interests of the game at heart. Your sort of true north is cricket, the actual 22 yards in the middle.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start and finish.
Now, he also, though, has been talking about, in that interview that he did over the weekend, the idea of a world where there are fewer test-playing nations. Now, ECB, you personally have been supportive of global cricket growing, most obviously when Ireland became a full member back in 2014. I mean, surely you wouldn't advocate seeing Test cricket retract now only, 5 or 6 years on from adding a couple of full members?
We've been following the debate on 2 divisions with some interest. If you create 2 divisions, I'm not quite sure who goes into the second division to start with, so it's the practical issues there.
Big time.
In terms of Test cricket, we have been trying to provide opportunities, whether it's for Zimbabwe or for Ireland, to play Test cricket. But I think sometimes we have to be careful in terms of avoiding mismatches in sport. Whether it's Test cricket or Test rugby, it is there to create the best level of competition, the highest level of competition you possibly can. So, I could see why, if you end up with 2 divisions in Test cricket, it makes sure that you've got best playing against best most often. Having said that, the first thing that goes into our schedules is our Test matches against Australia and India.
Right.
They're already scheduled in until 2031. Within the next 12 months, we'll be seeking to take those out to 2035, because they are what we base our cricketing business on. Effectively, they are the most high-profile, high-value games that we have.
And I think we all know and accept and understand that business model. I think Cricket Australia, it's a 4-year rolling cycle, and they make a profit when England and India are
exactly
and they
that.
don't, and that's fine. I think we're all well and true. But the idea of there being a reduction of full members, as far as test playing nations are concerned, that is that could be where the two-tier conversation easily gets to, and that's where Todd Greenberg's actually been quite upfront from his perspective, I think, in seeing a world where there are fewer test-playing nations. I just wonder whether there is a divide there, because, as I said before, you've been supportive of more test-playing nations. It would strike me as odd if now you're hosting Zimbabwe in 4 weeks' time. Your starting point would, I expect, be to retain or indeed expand the number of nations that can play Test cricket.
I think it has to depend on the size of their domestic market. If there is a domestic market, both in broadcast and ticket sales, which is prepared to underpin Test cricket in that country, great, go for it. If you're having to rely on ICC revenues, and the ICC makes most of its revenues from white ball cricket, with the exception of one World Test final every 2 years, then what I think we need to recommend is to ensure that those members are helped to drive up commercial revenues from their own markets. That's the way that we can properly and truly deliver sustainable Test match cricket. There are some countries that will be playing Test cricket whose own red ball domestic competitions are still in their nascent stages. So you've got to have horse before the cart and stuff. And I think that's where we need to spend a bit more time over the next 5 to 10 years, making sure that when we've got Test matches, it is based on a really good pyramid, and that we avoid mismatches. Because if we have mismatches, the customer feels cheated, broadcasters feel cheated, and sponsors feel cheated. And so we need to make sure that we've got the best playing against the best as much as we can.
And look, across 3 cycles of the World Test Championship, that's actually what we've had. I think below the radar, Test cricket's been outstanding across the last 6 years, and many upsets. Many results that we didn't anticipate. Great storylines running through, different combinations in the 3 finals as well. Kind of took me a bit by surprise, but given the success, and we might get into the nitty-gritty of the WTC in a sec, but theoretically, that if 9 teams coexisting in a tournament that's worked pretty well, then 2 tiers kind of... That was a bit of a... I didn't sort of see that one coming. Did you see that? It was broken in Australia, that story. Was that something... What was your immediate impression when
we were just following it with interest, but we're not in the lead of that.
Right, so this wasn't something that you had played a role in, or ECB had played a role. You found out about this when you picked up the paper as well. Yeah,
I think it was probably a discussion that took place during the India-Australia Test series, which was amazingly successful. The first 5 Test series in Australia for 20 odd years, something like that. Broadcast viewers went through the roof, attendances went through the roof. It was a great success.
So if there's going to be any 2-tier action, well, it can't be in the next World Test Championship cycle, because the Future Tours program's inked out for another couple of years. You know how I said before that it feels like this is the year, or these couple of years are going to influence the next 10 or 20. The FTP feels like the whole ballgame, doesn't it? I mean, this could be where there are radical changes to what we understand international cricket to be.
Yeah, and look, we can't, if you make a move to 2 tests, 2 divisions in it, we can't sit here and arrogantly say, well, we can never get relegated. But if you did have India, Australia or England playing in the 2nd division, and therefore potentially ICC saying, well, you can't play against each other because you're not in the same division, that would have a huge impact on the financial viability of cricket in all of those 3 countries.
And it needn't, of course. I mean, there could be out-of-division Test series that prevail. Like if England, I'm not even sure if they made the top 6 of the WTC this time. Let's say they did, but near enough didn't.
So there are other, there are other factors that we need to bear in mind. We don't want to undermine what is great about our game.
I like what you say there about promotion and relegation, though. The big 3, India, Australia, England, couldn't sit above it and say that, no, we're going to have 2 divisions, but we wouldn't deign to play in the 2nd division. You'd need to be part of that.
You would. And therefore sometimes as chief exec, you've got to be the boring one that says, but what if? And the what if is if one of those countries is not in the 1st division, then Test match cricket takes a big backward step for that period.
Do you think scarcity helps?
Yes, so scarcity massively helps.
Because this idea of tiers, as per the reporting, was that it would accelerate the cycle by 1 full year. 4 years would be put into 3, and suddenly you'd see...
So we saw a bit of that acceleration due to COVID, where it was a little bit more regular. I think there's, once every 4 years Australia at home, once every 4 years India at home is perfect. What we would like to do is to see if we can grow some of our other series onto that kind of scale. If you go back 15 years ago, the India Test Series was not as big as it is now. Nowhere near. It was all based on the Ashes. So you used to have to wait every 4 years for your Ashes cycle to kind of kickstart the finances of the game. Now it's every 2 years. It's either India or Australia. It would be great if we could find another 4 or 5 Test series. Is that against South Africa or is it against New Zealand? Because our experience is really top quality Test series going on for 5 tests is our most valuable form of cricket. So why wouldn't we want to find a route to having more 5 Test series?
Do it. No more 2 Test series. You heard it here first. Richard Gould on the front foot.
I'm not saying no more 2 Test series. I'm just saying more 5 Test series.
Well, I'm linking the two things together cheekily. Both of those threads we've been talking about, Saudi Arabia and then T&Cs, both those stories did come out of Australia. What do you make of that? These are 2 stories that are.
I think
did you draw anything from that? That this seems to be these conversations are starting.
Good creative discussions and thoughts.
Okay. Interesting. World Test Championship, what it looks like in the shorter term. Clearly, this is being talked about and debated at the moment. Imperfect as it is, it feels like most of the world are kind of on board with it, but there's a far stronger response over here. You hear a lot of comments. ECB chairman, Ben Stokes another, I think Rob Key recently as well, effectively saying they're unhappy with the structure, whereas others are getting on with it. You could form a cricketing argument that if Stokes' team didn't try and brazen it out on over rates in the 23 Ashes, they might have had a chance of reaching the final this time, but that's a bit of an aside. So, just in terms of how you interpret the way the World Test Championship works, there's a desire for more simplicity, but most of the solutions seem to make it more complex.
Look, I think the event is great.
Yeah.
And whatever process you get you adopt to get to our final 2. Yeah. Doesn't matter if it's a league structure or a knockout structure, there are always complications, and ours is a sort of a hybrid between the 2. But there's no doubt that when we host the World Test Championship here, South Africa against Australia, Lords will be sold out. It'll be an amazing event, and everybody will be talking about Test match cricket. That's what we want, right? The process of how you get there, therefore, can always be refined. We feel slightly sore in terms of the over rates. There's no secret about that. Over rates are there allegedly because they protect the enjoyment factor for the supporters. A lot of our over rates issues came about because of the last Ashes series, which was the most compelling cricket you could possibly hope for. So we think that there's a disconnect there. In terms of that. Also, there are regional differences. If you're in the subcontinent where spinners are bowling a lot of overs, you can whack through them really quickly. But I was up there at Headingley watching Mark Wood bowl at 90 odd mile an hour, whatever it was, and my word, every ball counted. And that's I think our frustration is that it's not just about the number of overs you get through, it's the quality of cricket that you can play in that period. And that's where we are.
Yeah, I think, and you and I could go 12 rounds on that, but when Ben Stokes was picked up on stump cam, almost brazening it out, saying, I don't really care that people are entertained, essentially saying the regulations needn't apply to my team. That did jar.
I get that.
That did jar. Yeah. So we're talking World Test Championship and we're talking Future Tours program, but specifically on the former, there was a big ICC meeting last week in Harare, which I'm sure you were over there in Zimbabwe with as well. What's the go with so much secrecy around these things? Obviously, you guys talk WTC.
Secrecy. That makes me laugh. Yeah, because I'm sat in those CEC board meetings at the same time that there are press releases, stuff that's been leaked from the meetings.
There's far more leaking. I was going to come to that. There is far more leaking than there is official communique.
Yeah.
Right? Normally, my point is, normally when there's a multilateral conference of any sort, there's a communique, there's a series of press releases. Yeah. That doesn't really happen at ICC annual meetings. It's more that you're right. We find out stuff from very good reporters who talk to their contacts. And there was an example of this in relation to the chief executive's allegedly, I don't know whether this happened or not, but the chief executives meeting where there was one source quoted as saying the WCA, World Cricketers Association report, was nothing but a trade union making needless noise, and saying that was representative of the chief executive's room, which presumably you were in for. I mean, keen for your take on that. I suppose that there's the WCA have gone away and spoken to 70 odd people, senior people inside the game, and had a bit of a crack at outlining some of the challenges and provided some thoughts. Is it as blunt as that source is saying that they're nothing but a trade union needlessly making noise?
No, I didn't recognise those comments. In terms of meetings, sometimes you need to have a quiet space in which people can voice their true opinions. So I think that often leads to better debate. The ICC meetings follow a very distinct pattern. You have Women's Cricket Committee meeting, Men's Cricket Committee, all the papers then get rolled up, Chief Execs Committee, and then the board. And the board is where it all happens, effectively. In terms of the World Cricketers Association, there is a bit of confusion about their role. They were before that they were FICA, so it was basically a composite body representing the players representative bodies around the world. It's now changed its name. I think it's had some investment from an American VC company, and very openly that they're saying that they are not now just looking after player welfare, but they regard themselves as a commercial entity in itself. And that does provide some confusion because it's normally up to the ICC or the ECB or the member boards to commercialise the game. And the World Cricket Association have said that that's a role that they wish to fulfil now. And we're not quite sure where that fits in within the ecosystem.
Did you sort of read the report and think, well, at least someone's having a crack at this? Because it is obviously incredibly complex terrain.
Yeah, it's really complex. And, I read the report. There was some good stuff in there.
Yeah. Last one on international matters before we bring it back home. Tom Harrison for ICC CEO. Is that you're hearing it more and more? Is that the sort of thing that the ECB, do you get involved?
No, that's a completely separate process run by the ICC. So,
no, sure, but like as someone he's your predecessor, right?
Yeah, no,
is it something that you kind of get in and play? We talked about diplomacy before. Is this something that ECB go, well, it'd be a good thing if our former chief executive ended up running ICC?
Tom's doing a great job at Six Nations at the moment, so I don't know what his plans are.
Okay. Bringing it back to the UK, a review of the county schedule happening at the moment. Probably not a bad time to be doing that after a cash injection to the first class counties who aren't 100 clubs, which we might come to in a sec. The Strauss review had a dart at this 3 or 4 years ago, but others in the game this time, like Steve Elworthy, for example, a senior CEO involved in that panel. I mean, let's just start there. Is it a pretty good time for this to be going through its motions, given that the counties must be feeling a little bit more secure, having had such a successful bonanza with the sale of the 100 teams?
Well, firstly, the 100 process is still ongoing, so we are not in contract yet, and we're still working that through, and so we are not we're not making any huge assumptions, because I think that would weaken our position elsewhere. But subject to us being able to complete on those within the next few weeks or few months, and I think that is very likely. It does put the game in a just a very, very different position. Hopefully about £50 million going into grassroots cricket, 500 million going through the professional game, all of which is going to be spent on good things which will sustain the game for the next 25 years, I believe. In terms of looking at domestic structure, I've been in the game too long, and I think I can count 6 or 7 from the time I was there. I've been involved. And the domestic structure is carved out in terms of responsibilities. It's the domestic structure is the sole domain of the domestic clubs. And so to affect any change in the domestic structure, you have to have a 2/3 majority in terms of support for that change. And I think what we're trying to do is to help facilitate those discussions. We know that they are that for example, the role of the PCA in talking about quantity. We know that those things are being heard, and we very much appreciate that. And we also know there are discussions as to what is best to help support England team, men's England team, because the domestic structure is on the men's side at the moment. So yeah, it's a it's a pretty important year. I don't know whether we will see the change. It depends on the 2/3 majority of the counties.
And of course, there's those, as you say, competing interests between what might be seen in the interests of the men's, say, test team or one-day team versus what the counties might see as, well, how do we bring in our revenue, number of blast games. The PCA have been on the front foot about the difficulty sometimes of travelling in the middle of the night. I'm sure we can all
we support that.
But I mean, the 100 has made that yet more complex, right? Like it's squeezed the schedule in ways and contorted it in ways that it wasn't contorted in the pre-100 world. So this is a problem that is getting more complicated, not less complicated.
Yeah, no, it is more complicated, and there are many more tournaments around the world. You know, we issue non-objection certificates for our players when they travel around the world, and we've had good and positive discussions with the players and the players' union over the last 5 or 6 months to provide that clarity. Players have got more choices than ever before. That's a good thing, right, for players. They can decide which tournaments they want to play in and what contracts they want. But it does mean that there's more responsibility on us to make sure that what we put on, both in terms of the financial reward that the players get and the quality of cricket they get to play in, has got to be the highest possible standard.
Accepting that it's hard to know where this will land, whether 14 games becomes 12 or stays at 14, fewer blast games. I know that's all kind of in the mixer at the moment, but I wonder on the money side of things, is there a message to the counties who have been doing it tough? I mean, only 12 months ago we were talking about whether we may even retain 18 first-class counties at that level. But now there is a way for them to service their debt in a more efficient way. Is this kind of the one where the line in the sand moment where you say to them, right, this is your money, use it well, because it will run out at some point. Obviously, there's a limit on how much money can come from this windfall, and you need to make sure you invest it well enough that you don't end up.
I think that's really well understood. You know, I wasn't having the argument about whether there should be 18 counties in previous years. The media may have been, but the ECB was, and our job is to look after all of our members.
Yeah.
And I think we've done that. And I think this money will get spent and invested really wisely. There are guardrails that will be put in place to ensure that that's the case. So in terms of business cases as to what it's being spent on. It is going to be invested, not spent. And if it's invested, it shouldn't run out.
Have you stuck the landing on your 100 deal? You were in India a couple of weeks ago, reportedly ironing out some kinks in how the TV deal might be sold.
No, it's not TV deal so much. I mean, there's a whole host of points that people want to address. There's and you've got some of the investors that are good to go now, others that want to ask more questions. I think when you look at the amount of investment that's come into the game, and more importantly, the quality of the investor, that's a game changer for us. And we're very happy to spend more time than we'd originally planned getting a base level of agreement, because no one's trying to look at the value and think that how do we reduce the value that we're going to pay. Nobody. Those conversations have not taken place. Everybody is going, this is exciting. How do we take it further and faster?
I mean, they're spending a shitload of money to buy into this tournament, right? And that's terrific for the England game. You got more than you anticipated, good as gold. But what about when what if the ask increases? Indeed, more games, bigger window, more use of the facilities. Like, how do you navigate? Like, if a prospective investor said, "Well, okay, we're in for this. What's this club going for? 250 million quid or something. We want in, but we want to make sure that it's double round robin. We want it to be a 6-week tournament." I mean, are these conversations? Are you wargaming that kind of thing in here? About these?
There are certain. So we said at the beginning that we were going to sell teams, not the competition.
Yep.
And so, for example, on the window is set at 27 days plus a 5-day prep window. It cannot expand unless
forever, or is it
unless it gets the agreement of the ECB and its members.
And its members, right?
Because at that point it would be encroaching further into the county domestic season and the England international season, and there may be good reason to do that in the future. But things like the window are locked. And so what we're talking about is more how do we increase the value of broadcast? How do we increase sponsorship? How are we going to push ticket sales forward? How are we going to engage a new audience? Take, for example, the South Asian audience. We see amazing levels of support come out every time that India or Pakistan or Bangladesh tour. But as a game, we have not done a great job at bringing those supporters back. They're UK residents, UK citizens, but we haven't done a good job at bringing them back to support the county cricket. When you look at 4 of the teams now being invested in by IPL teams, I think that's going to completely change. And I think we're going to see a different demographic coming along to domestic cricket in England. And there are those sorts of things that are going to add significant value.
Are you open to it being a T20 comp at some point?
Those discussions have not taken place, and
right.
it's not on people's agenda. At some point, if that's something they want to discuss, yeah, of course we'll have that discussion. It's a decision for the ECB board, though.
Yeah.
But look, we've got some amazing investors that have arrived, and we would be foolish if we were not to take advice, guidance and counsel as to how to take this game forward.
Right, because in the past, the commentary on this has been far more strident. It's like, no, it will be 100 balls. Whereas now, owing to the fact that there's private investment involved, it's got to be more collaborative, thus maybe T20.
It's got to be collaborative. You know, they're bringing a lot of investment and a lot of thought. And I think that we will see, you know, the 100's been incredible in terms of delivering innovation into the game over the last 3 or 4 years. I think you look at the investors that we've just brought in, that's going to superpower that.
In the ICEC report, it talks about a whole range of issues where the game's got to do better. Government school kids was a huge talking point throughout. Does ECB need to be even more ambitious? I think the target was 10% increase of public school investment. By public, I mean government school participation. Is this the time when it's like, no, let's just shoot for the stars here and see what happens? Or is this one of these times where there is so much more money in the game, you might have a one-off opportunity to just go hell for leather on getting kids playing the game who might be from the communities that you described before, who, for whatever reason, at the moment are, for whatever reason, slipping through the cracks?
We work with Chance to Shine and the Law Taverners,
of course.
And we put significant funding in through them to help support their programs. I think don't get too carried away though about the level of money that would be required to put cricket into every state school. I mean, we've got tens of thousands of schools across this country, and the annual turnover of the ECB is about half of Arsenal, half of Tottenham. So just put things into context a little bit. We can't do everything with money, so we need energy, enthusiasm, our army of 70,000 volunteers and all the rest of it to take the game forward. We are seeing some really good metrics changes. So, for example, one of the issues that we had was the level of ethnicity within our academy systems was below the ethnicity levels that you would expect to see in each particular region. The boys' academies are now up to about 32% ethnicity within the academies. That is brilliant. That is a huge step forward. However, when I look at the girls' academies, we're still roughly about 10%. So we know there are areas that still need to do there. But look, we are putting so much energy into trying to make sure that cricket can become the most inclusive team sport in the country. It's going to be a long journey. It won't take, this is not a 3 to 5 year fix. This is a social change that's got to take place, not just in this sport, but across the country.
Yeah, it might have been 30 to 50 years to get us to the place we're at. It might take 30 or 50 to get us back out the other way.
But we will still keep holding ourselves to account. And this is where the data is so important. The data allows us to see what we're missing.
We could probably crack on for 4 hours here. I'm mindful we're sort of nearing the end of our allotted window. So I'm going to do a little bit of England in the world to finish, and we'll just go back and forth and see how much we get through. In our last chat, I kind of threw you one from left field about Zimbabwe, about having not been hosted here for 20 years, and a couple of months later, you announced that you'd be host. I'm not saying that we made that happen, Richard.
We're going to call it the Adam Collins test.
I'm not saying that we made that, but the correlation rather than causation. Bangladesh has been 15 years.
Yeah.
I know CA know that because we give them endless grief about it. And they are hosting Bangladesh next year. They're a full member. They're a test playing nation. We've got to get them back here, don't we?
We have to make sure that the best are playing the best, and we have to make sure that we have that test matches are avoiding that everybody gets the opportunity to play test matches. Yes. But we've also got to make sure that we avoid mismatches. I'm not saying that Bangladesh should be a mismatch.
They beat England last time.
Exactly that. it's not just a case of a tick box exercise. This we need to make sure that we're thinking strategically about what cricket we play, when we play, and who we play against.
Yeah. But that idea of making sure that you are willing to be good citizens with your other full members. There's a threshold point with Bangladesh because they've missed out for so long.
I'll give you an example in terms of the good citizens. We will be making a contribution to Zimbabwe this year in order for them to travel. That wouldn't normally happen. But because of these specific advantages, because this is not a reciprocal test, we want to make sure that we can provide them with financial support that otherwise we wouldn't have done.
I think sometimes we don't really think of England being in Europe in cricket terms, just I suppose owing to where Europe sits. Last time we spoke, it was actually just before the Ireland Test match here, which unfortunately wasn't very competitive, but I know there's a sense that England always having that wanting to help Ireland. Also, it's been a few years since we were all in the Netherlands for that really exciting trip to. I mean, it was an unusual trip because it was the only cycle of the World Cup Super League, which is now no longer. I sort of wonder whether, with bilateral cricket becoming harder and harder to fit in, whether there might be like an annual tournament where the Dutch, the Scots, the Irish and the English play for a week in April and they rotate with those three countries and you send an 11. It doesn't need to be the England first 11 T20 side, whether you could do something that could materially help give the impression that you're doing something for those European friends.
Well, we do a lot for our European friends because we play in a global tournament within the ICC every year, both men and women now, which generates record revenues, which gets put through to them. Take a test match, the test match at Lords against Ireland, which finished a little bit early. We have a responsibility to our customers and our venues on that. And therefore, that was a £4.5 million recompense stumped up by the ECB in order to repay ticket holders for that. So these are very important things when we're working through it to make sure that whatever we do is financially sustainable.
It's a very fair point about the Ireland Test ending early and the blow to the finances for that. But again, this comes up a lot about just the act of playing those other nations. And I know you play Ireland a lot, terrific, but the Dutch and the Scots and some annual sort of, would you be open to a conversation around an annual T20 tournament where, it's a quadrangular, it's all over in a week, and it may not be your England first team.
Where are you going to fit it? You only have to look at our calendar. And, And we've got the Olympics coming up, which takes a week and a half out of our summer. We've got the World Test Championship, which effectively takes another week and a half out of our calendar every 2 years. And so, we'd love to do all of these things, but time is not with us. And sometimes, it comes back to let's look at the report by the World Cricket Association. We need to make sure that when these games take place, they really mean something. So it's not just a case of playing somebody to tick a box to keep people happy. They've got to mean something in terms of competitive tension.
Olympics not a bad place for us to finish, actually. Now, Team GB report today there might be a joint England-Scotland Team GB.
Yeah, it will be. It definitely. It will have to be a Team GB. So we'll be teaming up with Scotland, and we've had some of those meetings already. 6
teams at LA, 6 men, 6 women. I wonder whether, again, this comes back to NOC funding, and that's not your purview necessarily, but we all kind of know that the way to grow the game is to get more money into it in associate nations. If that tournament at Brisbane was, say, 16 or 20 teams, that could absolutely turbocharge participation in a whole different, regional qualifying and that type of thing. I mean, are these the types of things with the Olympic movement where there is flexibility to be a bit more creative, to utilise that apparatus to inject even more money into growing the game?
Yes, except that the International Olympic Committee doesn't distribute any money.
No, but the NOCs do, right? So you give them a chance to get there.
No, so when we go and play in the Olympics, the players don't get paid. The boards don't get paid. You get yourself there. So this is where it's different. IOC, you play for the medals and that's it. The rest of the money is retained by the IOC or the LOC. The ICC, International Conference, every event generates money that goes back to its members.
So it'd be a brass tacks thing. It would only be if the price was, because as you're describing there, it is an investment you feel like you're making for the good of the game more widely.
But also my understanding is that broadcast revenue, in the Olympics movement, broadcast revenue is retained by the IOC. ticket revenue is retained by the local organising committee.
Yeah.
And so they don't want to put tournaments on that they can't make money from on tickets, otherwise they lose money.
Yeah, I'll leave that with you as a thought. Growing the games for Brisbane, that could do like teams that are in Europe. If you had a couple of spots in Europe, a couple of spots in South America, these are where the game could
and then
grow.
Hopefully India after that.
It could well be, or maybe Riyadh. Who's to know?
Yeah.
Maybe one.
I'm going. My money's on India.
Last question. The longevity of chief executives in the business world, often people talk about sort of 5 years being best practice. Rarely the case in sport. Usually we have longer run times for chief executives, not all the time, but broadly speaking when they've enjoyed some time in the role. How do you see that as a construct? Is it the sort of thing where you might be here in a decade from now? Or are you more of the view that change it up, see what's coming next down the track?
Change things up relatively regularly, and I'm sure that you'll let me know when my time is done.
I don't mean about us telling you. I mean more about how you see it. I'm curious about whether...
I think you do need to change. These they're amazing jobs to do. They take a lot of energy, and therefore at some point, you expect to get tapped on the shoulder and go, "All right, we're going to sub you out now." That's just the way it goes.
Richard Gould, it's been fun. Thank you for canvassing as much as you had in your usually candid, sometimes political, but we got there.
Was I more political than I was 2 years ago?
Probably. But I think our audience will appreciate they're smart enough to know when you were and when you weren't. We'll do it again next year. Good luck for 2025.
Thank you, sir.